Thanks everyone for coming. So we've got Yeshen Venema with us here today. Yeshen, if you say hi.
Hello. Hey everyone.
So Yeshen's a product photographer. He visited us here at Clayhill, well, it's a few years ago now, but has been doing all sorts of things online, kind of helping people with their kind of product photography during this sort of time. So he's kindly prepared a presentation for us today to give us some kind of tips and things about that. So yeah, what we're going to do, I'm going to hand over to Yeshen, who's going to sort of share his screen with the presentation he's kind of got together. And I've got an opportunity for sort of questions. If you've got any, if you type those into the chat box, I'll be keeping an eye on those and can input those into sort of through the presentation. And if not, some of them can kind of wait till the end. So yeah, so that's all okay. Everybody can hear. I'll pass over to you, Yeshen.
All right, thank you. So I'll share my presentation. Okay, should be able to, can everyone see this now?
Yeah.
All good? And everyone can hear me?
Good. Yeah, I can hear you too.
Excellent. I'm just going to move this out of the way so you don't look at yourselves. Cool. Okay, right, so I'm going to talk about importance of good product photography and specifically how to take better pictures with your phone. And the examples I'll be showing, the photos I'll be showing will be, of course, the photos that I've taken either in the studio or on location. But more and more I'm focusing my work, especially during the lockdown, on people who are at home. Maybe they're able to get to their studio, but essentially they're having to take photos of their work themselves. And even pre and post lockdown, I think that's going to be the case. People are going to have to continue documenting their work. Maybe they'll have less money to work with a professional like myself, and more time to develop personal projects, bespoke work. Maybe they're adapting, changing their practice, and therefore need to document things. So all of these tips will be applicable to you, hopefully. Yeah, please do shout out with any questions during this. So if you don't already know me, I'm a product photographer. I also work with Squarespace, the website platform. I've been doing both of those things for about 10 years now. I went freelance initially, then my wife and I set up our own company, and we work from a home studio in Islington in London. Pre-lockdown, I was also working on location, so I've been all over the place: Somerset, Devon, Cornwall, Wales, Hampshire, Dorset. 3 or 4 times a year we would take people's work and go to a location property, and we're hopefully doing that again in September in Wales. If you're interested, you can see some news on that on my website, or if you join my mailing list, or just drop me a DM, I can send you some links. I work with many different craft organizations around the country, either in person or doing Zoom or virtual presentations like this. Everyone from Etsy to the Crafts Council and Cockpit Arts. So, typical week for me might look a bit like this, where there's a mix of location stuff and things in the studio, and every kind of material and product, from cosmetics to stationery and books, furniture, textiles, lighting, ceramics, of course, is a big one. So very diverse, but my niche is very much craft and design products and people that make them. I tend not to work with commercial brands. I don't shoot trainers or gadgets or anything like that. So my emphasis is very much on having clients at the shoot and involved with the process, and so that they can gain an understanding that it's not about the product when it comes to photography, it's about how it looks on camera. It's the end result. On camera and then on screen. So on the laptop, on the Instagram, on the phone, when your customer sees the product, that's what's important. So you know your work from making it, designing it, being with it all the time. When you photograph it, something happens, hopefully positive, but sometimes it all goes wrong. And you wonder why the object doesn't look like it looks to you, why the color's wrong, why the shape's wrong. It's because photography is a sort of transformative process where if you don't get everything right, it can alter the appearance and therefore the presentation. And then when it comes to selling online or applying for shows or events or trying to get new bespoke work, your potential customer is going to get misled about what you make because the photo is not accurate. So first impressions are really important in life generally, but especially when it comes to photography. They are fleeting and often just someone scrolling through Instagram, flicking through a magazine, perhaps flicking through a slideshow if they're judging an event application. I've been a judge on a few applications for events, and you just have seconds to look at something. You'll look at a picture, you might click on someone's website, but it's literally seconds. So the photos have to be eye-catching, original. They have to convey what it is about your work that's special. They have to do lots of things. They have to work very hard for you. So I would encourage you all to study natural light where you are and where you want to photograph things. Go around your house, look at the different light sources, the different windows, doorways, outside, inside, different times of day, and find those spots that look the most appealing for photography. And generally that is a single light source. So in this case, the ceramics is on a mantelpiece. There's a window to the left, which is illuminating them and creating a bit of shadow on the right, but it's not too dark on the right. And there's not two light sources where there's like a window on both sides and you'd have double shadows. So there's a nice natural balance to it. And that single directional light source is the classic still life lighting that you're used to seeing in paintings in classical art. Because most artists have their studios orientated with the window to the left or the right, a large single light source illuminating the sitter for a portrait or a still life scene. And that tends to work very well. In the studio, we can do all kinds of tricks and magic and do anything with the lighting. But if I'm using natural light, I always go for a single light source, directional, across the scene. Some boring stuff first with product shots, cutouts. So these are just plain shots of your work on a white background. Usually when you photograph it, it's not going to look like this. It's going to have to be edited to achieve this. And I'm happy to share, when I send the notes around to Deb, I'll include the email of the agency I use in India who does all my cutouts. So I send them 50 or 100 shots at a time, and they'll charge about 40 pence an image to do the editing, which saves me countless hours in front of the computer. So a cutout is quite boring, but can be very effective in terms of getting into the press, because they create layouts like this, gift guides, trend reports, themed shopping things using the cutouts. It standardizes your work. If you're selling on Amazon, they also use cutouts. Some other selling platforms like Wolf and Badger or other marketplaces prefer cutouts because they literally standardize the work. If you have lots of lifestyle photography from people, it can look very variable with lighting style, props, theme and that kind of thing. So a cutout is a standardized way of doing it. Not every product needs a cutout. I would say probably choose your top 5 or 6, maybe a group shot. Some products work better as cutouts than others. Those with a strong silhouette, a harder edge, a clear line tend to work better. Jewelry can be quite problematic because it's so small and fine and it gets a bit lost in the white space, unless it's kind of a chunky jewelry. But fine gold and earrings and things necklaces can get a bit lost, unfortunately. I usually shoot cutouts on some sort of surface. It might be white paper, grey paper, it might be a textured board. And then the client, in this case, Kitty McCall, can get 2 shots for one. So I'll give her the shot on the left, the original photo, and then I'll have that edited to a cutout, so she'll have that as well. So it's the same product, just on different backgrounds. And it has a slightly different feel on the natural shadow board compared to the cutout. So you might decide, once it's edited to a cutout, you want to edit it slightly, bump up the colors, increase the contrast. You can sort of play that by ear. So going from a plain product shot to a lifestyle photo, and you may have several stages in between. There's a product shot on white. There's a product shot on a colored paper of some sort. Then there's a shot of the product in a scene without props, but maybe the lighting's doing something interesting. Like in the case with this middle shot where we used natural window light directionally across, which we get in the morning in a very specific place on the floor. So we always know if you want that kind of light, although I could recreate that using my studio lighting, it would take a long time. And natural light's always a bit more interesting if you catch these spontaneous moments. So look out around your house at different times of the day for the, often first thing in the morning when the sun's coming in directionally. It might be in your kitchen, might be in the bedroom, might be in the front of the house, the back, and also in the evening. In the morning, it's going to be cooler, more like a blue light. In the afternoon to evening, it's going to be warmer. And that's what's called color temperature. So they have a different feel. Morning light is kind of fresher. You know, used to seeing that. It's like breakfast, you know, a cup of tea. Evening, it's like people are winding down for the day. It's more relaxing, post-dinner kind of vibe. You get very interesting light. Sometimes it's very fleeting. You might find that the sun is setting and you get some light that comes through a crack in the door just for 5 minutes, but it's really magical. So try and pre-visualize that and place your product in that spot and have your phone or your camera to hand so you can get a shot. And then there's full lifestyle photography where it's much more planned out, takes longer. In this case, it's a cookbook, so we're using food and tableware props. You'll see the colors are complementary to the cover, and there's layering going on to add texture, that sort of thing. And there's enough space around the product so you can see a bit of a scene around it. So it's the same book, shot in 3 different ways. You don't need all these shots necessarily, but in this case, the client wanted all these shots for press, blogs, social media, and so on. If you're thinking creatively, you can get into set building, prop making, painting backgrounds, plinths, getting creative with finding props and customizing them. The shot on the left, there's a large amount of negative space there. That was because this image was used on a billboard at Waterloo Bridge in London, and they wanted to put text over the top. It's for the Oxo Tower Shops Collective. And it's also a group of different businesses with their products together. So using plinths is quite a good way to stage things at different heights, to create variation, to have different color blocking going on. The shot on the left for this letterboard product. Again, quite simple setup, but color palette very carefully chosen, props very carefully chosen, lighting, again, directional. If you do anything reflective, or if you have foiling on work, you can see the metal on the letterboard. I had to hold 2 big white pieces of foam board directly in front, either side of the camera, to bounce light into that metal. Otherwise it would look black. And if you are doing anything reflective, whether it's flat reflective or it's a curved surface like jewelry, you're going to run into that problem. So bits of foam board held in various different places can be a big help there. Inexpensive hack. Then there's different kinds of mood that can be created with lifestyle photography. The shot on the left, again, is natural light in the studio. It's a bit later in the morning where the light's coming across, but it's not, because we're north facing, the light's not hitting the back wall. So there's this depth and shadow behind, which creates contrast and depth. It's a flat image, but it feels three-dimensional. So that's what you're going for. And lighting can play a great deal in creating that depth. Also, staging of the products within the space on the table. It's really important to use a tripod when you're doing product photography, so the camera is set in a position and you can move the objects around to get the right combination, the right symmetry. If you're doing things handheld, the camera's in a different position every time, and tiny little differences with the way things overlap will be hard to replicate. Tripod, you're locked in, you can work on lighting, positioning, props, all that kind of thing. And the shot on the left is a much more artificial mood where we're using flash photography in a very dark background that isn't lit to create a very hard, contrasty feel. But there's this kind of gradient light to it, which makes it feel like the lighting is doing the light, but it's actually the flash that's lighting the scene. So when we go on location, we find houses which already have nice interior features, which have nice furniture. And we can just turn up with the products, and having pre-planned the shots by either doing a recce or taking photos ahead of time, we can establish where we want to shoot and how we want to stage things. So these were shot in Broadstairs. The owner is used to be a textile designer, and she has a huge mid-century prop collection, lots of mid-century furniture, like nice sideboards. She had literally moved in a year ago and had stripped the whole house back, so it was perfect photography location. Now, many of you might be thinking, okay, my house isn't like that. I've got kids running around, I've got stuff everywhere in the corners. You're just trying to carve out these spaces. You're trying to find an area where the light's nice, and maybe you move furniture to that space, or you clear things away just enough so you can get the shot. Just to the left or right of this image, there might be a big pile of junk. It doesn't matter because you're not seeing that. So you just have to focus on what's in the frame. Location stuff like this, where it's slightly wider, it's almost like an interior photo, it can be good for textiles. Smaller things like ceramics, glass, and stationery might get a bit lost at this scale, but things like prints, upholstered furniture, hanging textiles, cushions, it's great for that. It's also good for a shot. The one on the left is a more realistic scene. The shot on the right is a more curated brand presentation, kind of visual merchandising thing where there's different things going on. There's fabric hanging over a banister, which you wouldn't normally do, but it's kind of like, this is what I do. This is like my shop window. So they're two different photos, but both effective for selling. Kitty McCall is the designer on those two, and it's Pamela Textiles who's in the middle. If your product has anything to do with food and drink, whether you're actually selling food or if the product's tableware, kitchenware, if you're getting into using food props, just be careful not to use too much. Don't get too messy or wet. Don't use things like soups and stews and full English breakfast. Just keep it quite minimal. A bit of bread and butter, some juice, some fruit, some tapas-y type things. Keep it light so the focus is still on the product. You don't want the props to be the focus, to draw the eye away from the thing which you're selling. And again here, this is all natural light. Kind of feels like morning breakfast time.
You can see me, so if you can.
Someone asking a question?
No, sorry, I think.
Okay, don't worry.
Yeah.
Again, back to prop making. Some of the stylists I work with like to customize props, so that they'll use spray paint or cut things out of paper or create models. That can be very effective. Obviously takes some skill and practice. You might try it and it looks terrible, but if you feel inclined or you have someone in your family who can do that, give it a go. The shot on the left for Noodle, who do these really fun soft toys, Claire Nicholson, the stylist, she had different color themes. So there was paper, which was layered up, and then a spray painted disc, like a shape, and then garden tools, which were spray painted, and a few plants. And then the products are placed in that scene. And the one on the right is more of a graphic, minimal edge with a few spray painted cones and then some sort of stationery in muted colors. The nice thing is with Jo Ham, who does the bunnies, with her work is that it's so graphic that she can Photoshop new things into those images. She just has to, in this case, match the perspective of the shot so that the artwork can sit in there. But I've kind of painted myself out of a job there because she can just Photoshop her new work in there and doesn't need to come for shoots as much as some clients. So that's an advantage of doing graphic art that's clean like that. You can also shoot blank frames and Photoshop your work into the frame. Again, some more custom backgrounds using grey paper and a weathered board, a concrete board and a disc, and some smaller bits. If you're doing jewelry, having smaller bits of tile, small blocks. They could just be kids' wooden blocks that you paint. If you have very small products like that, it's almost easier because you can have a small collection of these boards that you can paint in different ways, and they take up less space. The bigger your products, the more space you're going to need to shoot them and to store or create props for them. We have 20, 25 custom painted backgrounds in the studio, so concrete, marble, terracotta. So my wife paints these. She creates layers of paint to make it look like a real stone surface. But these are actually wooden boards, either ply MDF or internal doors, which we get from a hardware shop, which we can paint double-sided with different colors, and they're very light. They can be stacked against the wall. They don't take up too much space. Again, some more custom backgrounds. Sometimes we recondition, we resand a table just to change it up because we shoot them so much. Have a look in your attic, look out on the street when you're walking around on your daily walk. People throw the craziest things away. Look in skips. Also, if you see a nice surface on a door, on a wall, you can photograph it and you can have that image printed onto a vinyl by a company. If you just Google vinyl photography printing, it will come in a roll, in a tube, like a poster tube, and you can then use that to create different layers. We've got a few of those in the studio as well. It's a very cost-effective and storage-efficient way to do these custom backgrounds. So Deborah mentioned some of you are doing lampshades. It's quite a popular thing now to also make your own lampshade. Quite a few of my clients are doing workshops in that area. Lampshades sort of fall between textiles and lighting in a sense. So it's a textile product, but it's on the form of a lampshade. So there's many different ways you can shoot lampshades. The straight product shot way would be hanging on a single flex straight on, and that would probably be the cutout shot. Then you might do a shot of it on a lamp stand. In this case, having the cable going off is fine because she sells it with that stand and she wants to show that's the cable. But you could Photoshop it out if you like to. So they're slightly different scale. It's the same size lampshade, but sort of hanging one slightly closer for a cutout. The one on the right, pull back slightly further so you see the surface it's sitting on. Some other ways, introducing lampshade on a different base, sitting on a bench with a bit of a cushion coming in just to show a complementary pattern or to make it feel like something else is going on in the scene. Having props or other products just coming into the shot and going off the side of the frame makes it feel like there's something else going on just to the left. It makes it feel like it's more part of a room. Whereas when it's isolated, it's more a product shot. Also, like a detail shot of the, I forgot what it's called, eyelet, it's got a name. It's quite important if you're selling online because there's different sizes, different types. People will want to know, does it fit my bulb? Does it fit my flex? So make sure you include that as well. again, some other variations. It's really nice to shoot lampshades when you get it right, but it can be very difficult to get them straight. So you might find, especially if you haven't got a bulb in the base when you're shooting it, the lampshade is wonky. You might need a bit of blue tack just to wedge, or cardboard just to wedge in one side or the other to get it dead parallel. And you really want to get that straight, because if it looks like it's drunk and it's falling off to the side, it's a very annoying photo to look at, because you just want to straighten it. Same with the flex. Make sure you get a very straight flex. And if you're having problems with that, just shoot the lampshades on a plain table flat or on a piece of paper, and then photograph one flex, and then you can combine them in Photoshop if you're that way skilled. It's not too difficult, but especially for a cutout, then you know you've got a straight flex for every shot, because flexes can be, the cable can be slightly bumpy and curly and can actually make the lampshade go off kilter. Just a quick note on website banners. So if you do have a kind of website where you have a hero shot like this, where there's a wide shot at the top, and then as you sort of scroll down to other content, you tend to want to get this shot pre-visualized in a way that you can overlay text and buttons, like a call to action, over the top. So you don't want to fill it with product completely. You leave some negative space. In this case, for the V&A, it's kind of a Christmas themed photo where we knew they had a certain navigation layout and buttons that we're going to put on there. So we composed this shot, and then when they've actually used it, it works, because it's a, you know, there's enough contrast for the text to be read. You have to be careful with using light text on a light background or dark text on a dark background. So make sure you have enough contrast in your banner photos. The banner photo doesn't have to have text overlay, but it just looks a bit more professional, and it drives the attention to, in this case, Shop Christmas, or, you know, to the navigation on the top. So it's worth taking extra time to plan these kind of shots out. So a few tips for iPhone photography specifically, or phone photography. These tips will apply to Android too. The settings might be slightly different, but essentially you'll be looking for similar things. So a couple of things on basic stuff with the camera settings, using the grid, focus point, controlling exposure, and something about applications you can get for the phone to do advanced photography. So I'll go through each of these in sequence now. So the three basic things that control exposure, which is how much light is coming in to the camera, are ISO, which is to do with light sensitivity, shutter speed, freezing or blurring motion, depending on if it's a fast shutter speed or a slow shutter speed, aperture, also known as f-stop, which is how much is in focus. And then you have the three main camera modes, which are manual, aperture priority, and shutter priority. So ISO is usually, I would keep it under 500. If you go over 500 on your ISO setting, then you'll end up getting more grain and noise in the image, which you don't want. Usually on the phone, this will be set to auto. That's why if you're in a dark room, the camera might take a picture, but the quality of the image looks quite grainy. It's because the camera's bumping up the ISO to allow a photo to be taken. If you have the camera on a tripod and you shoot in aperture priority mode, the camera will determine how long it needs to expose properly in that dark room. And then you won't get noise. You'll get a longer exposure. With shutter priority, it can be used to freeze motion. So if you have someone moving like a model who's wearing clothes, you have to shoot at a minimum shutter speed of 1/125. If someone's moving fast, you'll have to bump up the shutter speed to freeze them. But usually with product photography, unless you're throwing something like a ball through the air, 1/125 will cover you for shots of models, or even shooting a lampshade that's hanging, or a piece of textile that's hanging over a pole, it might be moving fractionally in the breeze, even if it's imperceptible. And if you don't use a fast enough shutter speed, you'll get a blur and it won't be sharp. Again, the phone in auto mode will take care of that. But I'll show you later on, there's some applications you can get to control these things even in the phone, which will let you get more creative. Also, aperture priority can be used to get a shot where you have someone walking through a scene and they're slightly blurred, but something else is sharp. That's something you can do on a tripod. You see it a lot in interior magazines where there's somebody walking perhaps through a kitchen. The kitchen's all really sharp and that person's slightly blurred. That's because there's a slightly longer exposure and the person's moving through the frame. So they're not sharp, but the kitchen is, because the kitchen's not moving. So, important phone stuff. So, using the grid, always have a grid on your live view on the phone or on your DSLR. The grid is a faint set of lines, which divides the frame into, in this case, 9 segments, but it also gives you vertical and horizontal lines to make sure that you're lining up your verticals, which might be the edge of the window or the wall, the horizontals, which might be the table or the edge of your product, so you're not slightly off. If you don't have the grid, it's very hard to get that right. You might need to edit afterwards, and if you edit to fix it, what actually happens is you lose resolution because you have to crop into the image to fix it. So having the grid there is a big, big help. In the iPhone, you go into settings, camera, show grid. It's not on by default if you have a new phone usually. So it's also useful for flat lays. Phones are particularly good for shooting your own flat lay, which is something on a table or on the floor that you're photographing, because you can hold the phone over and use the grid to line up with the edge of a table, or perhaps you put some tape, some masking tape or colorful tape down to give you a line as a reference. Otherwise, you're tilting the camera off the axis either way and you'll get a distorted photo. Again, you can fix that, but it's best to do it in camera at the time. It just saves you time and stress afterwards. The other thing which not everyone knows about is focus lock, focus point. So if you, while you're composing a photo, if you hold your finger on somewhere in the image, the camera will lock focus on that point. If you hold it for a couple of seconds, you'll see a AF lock icon come up on the iPhone. And you can then even move the camera around and the camera will keep focus while you're moving. If you don't do that, sometimes if you're shifting the camera will accidentally focus on the background instead of the foreground, or the wrong part of the frame. Again, phones are pretty good at doing this automatically. New iPhones have autofocus function for faces, where they'll just lock into faces, but some of the older models don't, and DSLRs have big variation in the way that they pick focus. So locking your focus is really, really important. Again, on a tripod with a DSLR, it's much easier to pick your focus point and make sure it's sharp than it is with a phone sometimes. So anyway, focus is really important. If you're not focusing on the nearest thing to the camera, which is usually what you want to be doing, the eye just feels like there's something wrong. You're looking at the wrong bit. You're like, why isn't that sharp? You really want your product to be pin sharp. Also, when you have locked into that point, there's this tiny sun icon, which is quite hard to see on the screen now, but when you have this PDF, you can zoom into it. Essentially, once you've locked exposure, you can click with your finger and scroll up or down where the sun is to punch light in or add shadow. It's very useful for when something is backlit or there's too much shadow in a part of the product. It's a very handy tool. That, again, new phones tend to get everything right on auto mode, but if you want some extra control, it's a useful function. So watch out for distortion with different lenses. So even phones now, the new iPhones have 2 or 3 lenses built into the camera. So if you look at the front of the phone, the little circular openings, there might be 1, there might be 2, there might be 3. So the original iPhone lens is more like the one on the right. It's a wide angle, 13mm. It's almost like a fisheye lens. So you get more ballooning and distortion on different parts of the image, particularly at the edge of the frame. The image on the left is what's called a portrait lens, which on the, I think, iPhone 10, 11, 12 is the most zoomed in lens. So the way that you select the different lenses is you tap the small icon at the bottom of, when you have the live view, there's a little 1x, 2x circular button. If you cycle through that, you'll cycle through the different lenses you have. And most people don't even know there is this portrait lens. It's very useful. It's the best one to use for product photography if you're photographing an object, because you have less distortion. If you're photographing a room or doing a flat lay, the 13mm would be useful. The latest iPhone also has an ultra wide lens, which is great if you want to photograph an entire room or a very wide scene like a landscape photo in a kind of fun way, but it's not really for product photography. Is everyone still there? Hello?
Yeah. Hello.
Still there, good, good. You're also
Yeah.
quiet and attentive, excellent. Any questions, shout them out. There's, in terms of the technical side of product of like DSLRs and iPhones, there's tons more resources online, YouTube tutorials on specific things. But the basic stuff you really want to understand is aperture and shutter speed. So I would watch some, and lens choice. So I would watch tutorials on aperture, shutter speed, and lens choice, and maybe color temperature. That can get a bit more technical. You really have to understand what even if you're using auto mode on the camera, you want to understand what the camera is doing to get the picture. Otherwise, you're not in control. So I'm pretty sure most of these apps are on both Android and iPhone, some of them for iPad too. So just for taking photos and editing them, Snapseed, Camera Plus, VSCO, Cam, Moment, and First Light, all handy ones. I would just try a few different ones, see what you like. They all have slightly different designs and some are more complicated. VSCO is also a kind of social community. Moment also make lenses for the iPhone. I have one of their portrait lenses, which is great. Makes you feel like a bit of a special photographer if you put a new lens on your phone. Adds a bit of weight, makes you feel a bit more professional. And then there's editing apps as well if you like to edit on the phone or on the iPad. So Photoshop do a couple of apps for retouching or exporting images. Affinity Photo is a fantastic application, which is essentially a Photoshop Adobe competitor, where they've built a full editing app, which is as good as Photoshop, but you don't need to subscribe to it like you do with Adobe. So if you're looking for something just to have to do some slightly more advanced editing that you do in the basic applications, especially on the iPad, check out Affinity. Canva and Over are both very useful apps for adding text, combining images together, creating graphics and banners for social media and website things. Over is a bit more fully featured. Over also does video and things for Instagram stories. Very handy. It's a good way to get your brand messaging consistent. So if you have a certain color palette and a logo and a way of presenting your stuff that's consistent, it builds trust, and trust equals money. Essentially, people are going to buy from you. So whereas if all your photos have a different filter and you're all over the place with the fonts you're using, it can get a bit frustrating for a customer. They might give you a pass here and there, but they like to see a brand. And Darkroom is the most advanced editing app I've seen for the phone, which can also edit RAW files on the phone. I tend not to use much editing on the phone because I'm usually sharing photos I've taken on my camera. I've already done the editing, or I'm so used to using my iPhone and working with light that I don't need to edit the photos much. I tend not to use filters much either. Essentially, all a filter is a series of editing decisions. You can make your own filter as well in apps like Moment and VSCO. Essentially, it's like contrast, saturation, brightness adjustments, and then you've got a filter. The Instagram built-in filters are quite extreme and can make things look very unrealistic and a bit kind of gaudy, in my opinion. So I would go for something more subtle. And maybe you don't even need a filter. If you're using light correctly and you're getting a good exposure, you probably don't need a filter, because it's probably going to adjust the colors of your work. It might make something look too contrasty, too sharp. So I would just do it on a judgment call. Look at the image and see if it needs it. So finally, things to watch out for, kind of main problems you see with pictures, or at least I do. Verticals and horizontals not being straight or parallel. So it makes the image feels like it's distorted or leaning to one side. Tangents are referring to what happens when verticals or horizontals line up with each other. So the edge of your greeting card and the edge of the window are lining up exactly in the frame. And that's a funny thing. You don't want that. You want it to be slightly to the left, slightly to the right. Color temperature, which I've mentioned, is how warm or cool the image is. Different times of day, that's going to change. So you've got to watch out for the colors in your work, particularly in textiles, can be very dramatically different depending on the color temperature. So obviously the sun, daylight, color temperature is going to change. You can also edit the color temperature in the camera or in the phone and make adjustments. So if it's a very warm light, you need to make the color temperature cooler to compensate, to make white or gray look like white or gray, as opposed to yellow or blue. So think of it as a kind of sliding scale that you can make an adjustment to balance it. The more the light's changing, the more you're going to have to make those adjustments. So taking photos on a cloudy day can be beneficial because there'll be less variation in color temperature. Over underexposure. Usually what I see is more underexposure than overexposure. In general, there's a saying in photography to expose to the right, which means make it a bit brighter than it needs to be. It's easier to edit it, to come back a little bit, than it is to add light when it's darker. So don't go too extreme, but if it's a little bit overexposed, you can bring it back. Backlighting, or lighting that's too front on, you want the lighting to be directional rather than too backlit. There's some cases where you might want backlighting, but there's not many. With glass, if it's translucent, transparent, backlighting can be very flattering. But for most products, directional side lighting is best. Reflections of you, of the camera, of other products, of the room, of things outside in windows. Just keep an eye out for those things. Sometimes reflection can be a good thing. I find with gloss, shiny ceramic, it's actually better to have a bit of reflection in the work to show what it is, rather than obsess about trying to manage all the reflections. And less is always more. So if you're not sure about a prop, if you're not sure about a product grouping, take things away rather than add more things. Keep it simple. I'm delighted to offer you all a special discount on my shop, which includes the 2 guides which I've created. One of them is how to prepare for a photo shoot and plan a photo shoot, either by yourself or with a photographer. And the other one's all about Squarespace, an intro to Squarespace and how to build your own website or work with a Squarespace designer. So until the end of May, you can get 20% off with the code Clayhill20. Okay, hopefully I haven't sent you all to sleep and you've got some questions.
Yeah, no, sorry, I was just having a bit of a technical issue there, but Emma just had a question about you were mentioning some of the apps that you could use for editing. We were just wondering whether to remove the background from an object, whether you need to use Photoshop or whether there are other apps that are out there that could do that sort of thing.
It depends how much you're doing it. To be honest, I would, I'm just going to give you the email address.
Can I say, I wouldn't need it that often, just occasionally, because they're paint I'm a painter. Just occasionally it'd be really nice to have a blank one, but I don't need to do it very often.
Okay. I'm just trying to get back to the, where's my chat window gone? Let's get the chat back. There we are. Okay. So this email address that I've just put in the chat window is the editing company that I use in India.
Okay, great.
Just send it to them, basically. I can't stand editing cutouts.
I can't see the. See it. Can't see it.
It's been put into the chat box, but we'll export the chat at the end, so all of the information.
Yeah, you'll get it at the end.
We'll have that.
Essentially, just use. I normally use WeTransfer, which is a free image transfer service. WeTransfer.com.
Oh yeah.
And then give them clear instructions as to what you want. Send them an example image of how you want it to look. And they usually do it overnight because they're in India, different time zone. I get it back the next day. They can do editing as well, retouching, but you have to be very, very specific with what you want. So send them an example image, circle things, annotations, that kind of thing. But if it's just cutouts, just say, you want it cut out on white, with or without a shadow. Find something on the internet that is close to what you want. Send that as an example. And it's about 40 pence an image.
Sorry, is that does it matter how much you send? Because I know you mentioned you sent a lot of stuff to them. So is it like a price that's standard for everything, or? I
think it's around 40p. You can get a quote. I mean, I've been using them for about 6 years, so they might give me slightly better rate for bulk stuff. They always do me favors and do things quicker, but I think it's from 40p to 70p. I think the stuff like very fine jewelry would be more expensive. We have to remember, because they're working from the photograph, so the photograph you give them has to be evenly lit, as high resolution as possible. Otherwise, what you get back will be relative to the source file. So make sure you give them a high quality photo, at full size, rather than web size. Actually, there's another. I remember I've got a. If you're curious about DPI and image size and what all that stuff means, if someone's asked you for like an image that's 3 megabytes at least, or 72 DPI, I've got a blog post that I wrote about that summarizes everything. So
brilliant, thank you.
Just put that in the chat as well, because that can be a bit confusing, and organizations, magazines, press are still confused about this stuff.
Yeah.
Even Etsy, on the Etsy image guidelines, they mentioned that images should be 72 PPI, which is irrelevant.
Yeah.
It's only for printing.
Yeah.
So, any other questions from you?
I don't know if anybody else has any questions. Nobody else has put any in the kind of box. So I know it's a lot of information, and like I say, everything that was included in the presentation today, you will be sort of sent. So if you're not sort of subscribed to our newsletter or aren't linked with us kind of via social media, if you just leave your email address in the kind of chat box here, we can send you the details of that onto you. And like I say, it'll be updated onto our website and everything as well. So so yeah. If I just I'll share back with the group here. Yeah, I mean, if nobody else has any kind of questions for Yeshen at this sort of point, I know you had sort of talked about a kind of what was it, Yeshen?
A photo challenge.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's on the end of the PDF. I'll share the PDF with you because it might be too much for people to think about now. It might melt your brains.
Okay.
It's kind of a creative challenge that you can get on with yourself in your own time, using your product and whatever camera you have to hand.
Okay.
And then if you want, you can share the pictures on social with a special hashtag.
Sorry, I've got one question.
Yes.
With a macro lens for a digital DSLR, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. I remember I had some notes written down that maybe the lens needs to be 1:2 ratio magnification or 1:1. I can't remember which one it was.
It depends. There's different kinds of macro lenses. Essentially, a macro lens is usually 1:1. So you're usually, the reason it's called that is because you can go up to something, so it's scale in the lens kind of thing, very close. Other lenses can't focus that close. So for very small objects, a 1:1 ratio macro lens is usually 90 millimeter, 100 millimeter, or 105 millimeter in focal length. And it means you can go very close to a piece of jewelry and it fills the frame in the same way that you can shoot like a chair and it fills the frame with a normal lens. So it's essentially allowing you to go right into the scale of that object and make it seem like it's as big as a chair. Just have to watch out for the higher the focal length, the higher that number, the more extreme the differences are in depth of field. So with a macro lens, if you're shooting at a low aperture, like a low f-stop, a fraction of a centimeter might be in focus. Whereas if you're shooting with a 24 millimeter at the same setting, you might have half a meter in focus. So relatively, the closer you go to something, the more extreme the blur is, basically. So you have to watch out for that. There's technical things you can do like image stacking, if you're really into that. But you can have a lot of fun. I love shooting macro. Actually, the nice thing about most macro lenses is you can use them as a telephoto lens as well as a macro lens. So you can use them to shoot a portrait or wildlife photography. Or if I'm working in the studio, if you can see, I've got a macro lens on this camera now. I can shoot an image of something on my table here from this scale, then I can go right up and shoot a leaf without changing the lens. So it's a very adaptable, fast way to work. And some macro lenses have different settings on, so you can have everything in focus, or when you're going very close, you can flick a button on the lens. Macro lenses are brilliant. But you can also get a macro lens in 50 or 60 millimeter sometimes, or even 24. Essentially, macro means that you can hold the lens very close to an object and it will still be sharp. Other lenses, usually when you get to about 20 centimeters away, it won't focus anymore. So, and you can get secondhand, if you have a Nikon, Canon, Pentax, you can get secondhand lenses that will fit on the camera, on the new DSLRs. So if you have a new Canon, you can get a vintage Canon lens and it has the same fitting usually. And the vintage lenses are very good, much cheaper, and sometimes have manual focus, which is nice. So you can learn how to use manual focus. Sometimes they have manual aperture, which is the f-stop ring closest to the camera. And it's how I learned to actually take photos, was with a Nikon DSLR and a vintage 50 millimeter lens that my mum gave me. And that's how I learned about focus and aperture. Because if everything's on auto, you're just not really learning, basically. So get into manual mode, make some mistakes.
Yeah. Camera recommendation for beginners or equipment use, or
do I have any recommendations for?
Yeah, beginner cameras. If you wanted to get into product photography or photographing your own work, do you have any like beginner cameras or lenses that you would find useful to share?
Pretty much every camera that's made now is like really good. It's like there's no bad cameras anymore. There's just bad photography.
What about?
You can't buy these Cybershot cheap like throwaway cameras. They're still around, but no one buys them anymore. Essentially, it's a DSLR or it's what's called a bridge camera, like a Lumix or a Fujipix. They're all great. They're all down to personal preference of feel. Right now, it's a bit tricky because you can't go to shops to test things out, but you might find that there's a camera shop that will loan you something to test it, or if you have a friend who's got a certain camera, you could maybe borrow it for a while, de-sterilize it first, of course, to test it out, because they're all different. The buttons are different, the menus are different. I find the clearest menu is probably Nikon in terms of the way that it's laid out as a beginner, but someone else might find the Sony one easier to use because they've had a Sony camera before. The Sony menu for me is one of the most complicated, but I have a Sony camera now. just took me a while to get used to it. If you want to get vintage lenses, then I would get a Sony or a Nikon or a Canon, because then there's lenses from 1920 will still fit on the camera. Whereas Sony used to make TVs and hi-fi equipment, now they make cameras. There are no old Sony lenses. You can get adapters and things, but ideally I would go Nikon or Canon. You don't need to spend thousands of pounds on the camera. The lens is probably more important in terms of quality of the image, but the most important thing is the light. So a good photographer who understands light, has a very cheap camera, will take a much better picture than someone who's got a £20,000 camera and lens, just because they know about lighting and how to use that. Yeah. So there's no clear answer to that, I'm afraid.
No, I think you've answered it well. Thank you.
Okay.
I guess it's just a case of giving it a go, isn't it? You know, and that's
definitely
that's where we are.
Just get going. Yeah, with everything. Any kind of project, just start.
Yeah.
Don't wait for the perfect day, the perfect light.
Great. So thank you, Yeshen. That was amazing. I mean, so informative. A lot to digest. And yeah, like for everybody, we'll have that available for you to sort of take away. And yeah, as Yeshen kindly says, there are some more kind of product guides on his site, which we can access and things as well. So that's brilliant. Thanks ever so much. And I mean, what else are you up to before, you know, and until we get to the other kind of side of this?
So I'm like lots of people, I'm working on online video training. So I'm building my first video course, first in a series. The first one's actually going to be all about using light and observing things rather than getting into camera technicalities. It's just going to be all about finding light where you live, in your house, in your studio, understanding it and controlling it, setting up your shooting space. So that should be ready in the next month or so. It'll be on my website, but also on some other marketplace platforms like Skillshare and Udemy. It's kind of a golden age for online training now. So if you're interested in that, there's lots of resources out there, but essentially if you make a course, if you have 10 people that are interested in something you're doing, make a course, sell it to them, and you'll end up with some passive income going forward. Once you design the course, as long as you don't mention specific platforms, the course structure can be uploaded to a number of different website platforms. And some of them you might sell one thing a month, another one you might sell 5 a month, but it's all passive income. It's all income while you sleep. So I would encourage anyone who's interested in that to give it a go. It takes a bit of work, and the first one doesn't have to be that professional. There's some really awful courses out there that are very successful because they're answering a question that everyone wants the answer to. And that's why the best YouTube tutorials are usually the most low budget ones, because it's just like, how do I do that thing? And it's like, oh, there it is.
Yeah.
It sounds terrible, but you can follow it. So give it a go. But yeah, once I've got the course finished and available, I'll share a discount code for that as well.
Oh, good. That's really kind. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Great. Well, yeah, thank you very much. And yeah, thank you all for coming. For anybody that's sort of was at the kind of last meeting that we had, we were sort of saying about kind of having a bit of time to sort of share the kind of things that you've been sort of making and doing at the moment. If people have time to kind of stay on the call, that's great. We can kind of talk through that sort of thing. But you know, there's too much screen time for people at the moment. It can be a bit too much as well. So if you need to head off, that's fine too.
I've got to shoot off. I've got some stuff to photograph.
Yeah, amazing.
But really lovely to see you all. Glad you enjoyed it, and I'll send you the PDF link and everything so you can share it.
Thanks, Yeshen.
Have a good day, guys.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.